Welcome to another exciting episode of the Sopranopreneur podcast, season 1, episode 10, getting to the end of season 1, which I think is really exciting. I've got a really big surprise coming up for you too here next week. Tony, once again, knowing that Dr. Cusamano and his friends kind of embarrassed him, he decides, hey, I'm going to fuck with him again, and he gets kind of a shoebox and puts sand in it and ties it. Carmela comes in, she laughs, she thinks it's cute. We start the show with Tony giving Cusamano a box of cigars, which he was really excited about. Now we end the show with Tony giving Cusamano a box, wrapped, and it's kind of like, hey, you did a favor for me now. I gave you cigars. Now can you hold this box and do me a solid? Cusamano's scared. He doesn't know if there's a dead body in there. He doesn't know if it's a gun. He doesn't know what it is. And they're obviously scared they could get in trouble. So where he thought it was cool to kind of tout his relationship with Tony early on at the dinner party and at the golf course, now that he has to do something that could be illegal, he's all scared and upset. So really just a great episode. So many entrepreneurial lessons in here. Like I said, the idea of expanding your network, the idea of who do you trust, the idea of recognizing talent and seeing where it is, the ideas of that just because you have a perfect situation set up in business doesn't always mean it's going to be successful. All right. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Sopranopreneur podcast, season 1, episode 10. We are here. We're in double digits, guys. This is exciting. Getting to the end of season 1, which I think is really exciting. I've got a really big surprise coming up for you too here next week that I'm excited to share. And I'm enjoying a Monte Cristo today. And why am I enjoying a Monte Cristo? We're going to talk about that in a second. But I'm enjoying a Monte Cristo on today's show. But let's dive right into it. We open up on really just a great scene here, right? This is probably the mob scene you want to see in Sopranos. It's a mafia scene that you want to see. And I love it because this episode is all about messages, networking, and kind of growing in who you are. And believe it or not, this is probably one of the most entrepreneurial lessened up episodes I've seen in a long time. So make sure you look down below and you get that key entrepreneurial concept. Normally I read it at the beginning of the episode, but I think we're going to talk about it so much, I want you to go down there and read it. Even pause the episode if you need to, but if you're driving, don't pause. But do take a look at that. Make sure you take a look and see. But we see the guys here, and basically they're pretending to deliver a refrigerator. We got Pussy, we got Paulie, and they're basically going to rob this guy. And this guy doesn't look like somebody. I don't know what he did, too. We didn't really get the full backstory here. But this guy's kind of in the way. They're in the hallway. He comes out. He goes to his door to open his apartment, but he looks nice. He's in a suit. He looks like he'd be a Wall Street guy. He opens his apartment door. Paulie puts a gun to his head and tape over his mouth, throws him inside. Tell him to stay away from Port Newark. We've told your friends over and over again. They didn't listen. And he says, okay, I'll tell him, with his mouth, kind of mumbling it out. And he says, they've been told. Now I'll tell him. Shoots him in the head. Boom. His brains go out the other end. And you would think this would be a sad scene. But then you cut, and the guy's going to this guy's bedroom, and they find just suitcases full of money. And it's like a Vegas, happiness scene coming on here. Like, oh, wow, look at what we found. Look what we got. So it really changes the whole tone of it, as if something good happened, which, once again, the irony of the show, right? Here they are. They just killed the guy, but they found a bunch of money, so they're happy. And you are, once again, rooting for the bad guys. Me included, not just you, me included. You're rooting for the bad guys here, which I think is really interesting. It's a big score. The other thing is we cut to that scene, and Tony is in his kitchen, and he sees Dr. Cusamano, which who's his neighbor and his doctor, who referred him to Dr. Melfi. Dr. Cusamano is his family's physician. He referred him to Dr. Melfi, and Dr. Cusamano is one of the few people that Tony knows, really it's him, basically, in Carmela, that we think at this point. There are other people that know, but nobody knows that yet, that know that Tony's going to therapy. And he gives him a box of Monte Cristos. Not a box of these. They're actually a box of Cubans, and they're illegal. He said, man, Tone, these are illegal Cubans. And he's like, they're cigars. He's like, relax. And he gives them to him. And Cusamano's impressed. He's excited, but he's also uncomfortable because it's kind of illegal. Tony gets a phone call from Paulie while he's there, talking about the big score that they just had. And one of the things that I also find very interesting in kind of this whole process is that Tony takes a call on a hit, which we know he doesn't do later on in the show. I don't know why they did this early on. That's not good mafia practice. But he did take the call at his house from Paulie. They talked in code, but, still, I'm not sure why they did that. But, Cusamano kind of hears this and knows something shady's probably going on. But he's okay with it, and he takes the cigars anyway. And he tells him, hey, Tony, you should really come out to the course, and you should play. And Tony's like, no, I play the public course. We'd love to, come out and play some golf with us. So, once again, the first challenge for Tony to expand his network here, Dr. Cusamano is inviting him out to go play golf. This is something that he wants him to do. And Tony kind of shrugs off, I don't know, maybe we'll see, We cut to the scene of the guys celebrating the big score, and how are they celebrating it? They're at a hotel staring with all the money. They're with their gumas and a bunch of other different women that are not their wives or their girlfriends, except for Christopher, which we'll talk about that in a second. And Tony looks at the money, and once again, they're kind of celebrating this. It's like as if they won it in Vegas, right? Not that they just killed somebody to get it, which we seem to leave out. And once again, I think it's just kind of ironic here that we're rooting for the bad guys, but I love it. It's what makes The Sopranos great. It's such great writing by David Chase. And he tells them, yeah, guys, this is great. We got this money, but we shouldn't put it, back out on the streets. Which you remember he told Artie he should maybe put some money out on the streets in the previous episode. We shouldn't do anything illegal with it. He goes, we got to put it in an IPO. We got to put it in the stock market. Let it grow for us, kind of live out the juice. You see him wanting to do something good with the money to help his family grow that's not in this mafia thing. I think it's really interesting the way a lot of these mob guys with their kids and the business, they're all looking for an escape. They're all looking for a way to get out, which I think is very interesting. So we see them celebrating the score, and then we cut to Christopher and Adriana. Chris says, no, I'm out. I'm going to go celebrate with Aid. You guys have fun here at the hotel. He's actually going to be going with his girlfriend. So he's going to go with his girlfriend to celebrate the win. And they go to Broadway. They go to see Rent. They go to the Cirque for dinner, but they're still hungry after the play. So they go to like a burger joint. Can't tell if it's meant to be like, in New Jersey or on the way home from the city or wherever it may be. But, they're basically leaving the city and they stop at this burger joint. Which tends to be in an African-American neighborhood, so it's not somewhere where there's a lot of Italians and Chris isn't getting served. He's saying a lot of inappropriate, borderline, we can play around if it's racist on this. He's saying a lot of racist things, and everybody's just kind of calling him a jerk and an idiot. Adriana's getting embarrassed, but there's this one guy in there, and he's kind of talking to people, and he's, kind of directing things. This would almost be how you would see Tony if he was at Vesuvio, or you would see Chris, if he was, somewhere where he has his authority. And one of the things that we see is the guys are basically saying, they're all talking to this guy and they see Chris acting stupid. And the one guy looks at him and a cop leans in and tells basically the Tony Soprano equivalent that's in there, this mobster gangster guy, that he's only tough like that because he's semi-hooked up with the Tony Soprano crew. So once again, business lesson here. You are who you associate with, right? Chris has a little bit of clout, not because he's a great gangster, a great mafia guy, but because Tony is. And because of that association, he's kind of tough. And he orders the food. He goes up to him. He says, man, your girl seems embarrassed. Chris once again makes another off-color comment. They basically walk out. When they walk out, they see this beautiful Rolls Royce. Now, keep in mind here, we've talked about this signs of success, right? Tony's sign of success for him is the house. He has the house, and at this point in The Sopranos, he's driving kind of a busted-up Suburban. Carmela has kind of a nice Mercedes. But he doesn't have that nice of a car, where Christopher has the really nice Lexus, and we saw this in the very first episode, but he lives in kind of a tiny apartment, so he really doesn't have a nice house. Christopher's impressed with cars. That's, for Christopher, cars are his status symbol. Like most younger people are, there's that age gap between Christopher, and he sees a Rolls Royce outside, and he goes, oh man, must belong to the rapper inside, must belong to him, or he actually says the homeboy inside. We find out later that he's rapper, Massive Genius, which is obviously a fictional rapper. It's not a real rapper. I think kind of based off Master P, which I'm an old guy. If you remember Master P, shout out to my wife. But you remember Master P, make him say, na na na. So some of you listening will get that. That's kind of an inside joke with my family and friends. But so we see that sort of Master P guy come out and he says, oh, that's who that is. And then one of his crew comes out and says, hey, Massive wants to have a conversation with Adriana's like, that's who it is. Massive Genius, the famous rapper. I know who he is, and he wants to have a conversation with him, so they invite him to his house. Now, once again, Massive, while he has a nice car, he also has a nice house, right? So they go to Massive's house, and Massive basically says that he wants to sit down with Hesh. So that's really what he wants to happen. He wants to sort of have a sit down with Hesh because he says he has business to talk with him, and he wants Chris to kind of make that happen. So he sees Chris, once again, kind of respects him a little bit. He's got Adriana, who's a pretty girlfriend. He's got, a little bit of everything else. So I think the idea behind that is that he wants him to set this up. So Chris now gets the authority. But Chris, has always wanted to be respected as a gangster, which I think is funny. If you remember in a previous episode, Christopher, was mad. They were talking about Brendan Falone, who was dead, as being gangster and almost put him into like a depression spiral. And then when the newspaper came out and they listed him as one of the people that could possibly get indicted and being involved in the organized crime thing, he was super excited. Here's this guy, though, respecting him as a gangster, but he's got a nice car, a nice house. And Chris is now back home with Adriana, and he's mad. He goes, that guy's a gangster. That guy's a gangster. He also identifies himself as a gangster. He's a gangster rapper. And Chris is like, I'm a gangster. I'm an OG original gangster, but I don't have the fly Hampton house and the nice Rolls Royce and, Alec Baldwin come to my house. Chris always looks at what he doesn't have. Chris always looks at what he doesn't have. And this is the problem in life and business. You can't look at what you don't have. Why is this business over here doing better than me? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? You can look at other people and learn from them, model them, set goals for yourself, challenge yourself. But Chris is looking at what he doesn't have in the negative, not in the positive, which you could look at it either way. But he's really looking at the negative. And even if you look at what Massive does, Massive wants to sit down with Hesh, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, to progress something positive along. Massive wants to have that conversation so he can make something good happen. And Chris is just always looking at, hey, this is what I don't have. This is what I don't, take place, which is why Chris isn't successful. If we're focused on the negative, if we're focused on things that aren't good, we're never going to get anywhere that's positive. And that's what Chris is doing. He's focusing on the negative. He's not focusing on the positive. And it's really, really important to remember that, especially in life and in business. If we're focusing on the negative and not the positive, then we're not going to grow. We're not going to be able to move to where we want to go. So we see that Chris and Adriana kind of having this issue. And they're talking about the music industry now, how Italians used to control the music industry. We go back to Tony's house, Tony and Carmela. Carmela is telling Tony that she wants to got invited to a barbecue at someone's house, another neighborhood person, kind of in that Cusamano circle, right? So there's Tony, he has his crew, and Cusamano, who's also Italian, obviously has his crew, but they're all professionals, doctors, lawyers, stockbrokers. They're all kind of that type of a professional group. And Tony, Carmela says she was invited. She says, "Do you want to go?" And Tony makes a face. And she says, "Okay, I thought I'd ask, but it'd be nice for us to once again expand our network and get to know people." And then Tony steps back and sort of says too, I don't know, maybe it's good. I did have, Cusamano even invited me to go golfing. So I think the idea is that there's these opportunities coming up for Tony. There's these opportunities that they're going to be able to sort of, do these different things to expand their network, to do better in life, to do better in business. That's the only way you grow is if you expand your network. And we're going to dig into that a little bit more here as we go along. All right. So Adriana and Chris, we come to them again, their network, and she wants to go into the music business. So Adriana says, "Listen, I worked in the restaurant and Chris and Adriana are out at the restaurant she works at, I think actually for dinner. I can't tell whether she's working or they're out to dinner, but either way, they're at this restaurant. And, Adriana comes over and says, "Listen, I've been thinking, I've learned a lot here working in a restaurant. Like I said, I truly believe that everyone should work in a restaurant. Everyone should work in a restaurant at some point if you're an entrepreneur. You learn so much." And she says it. "I've learned how to deal with difficult people. I've learned about processes. I've learned about different personalities. I've learned about managing things. I really want to get into music management. That's what I want to do." They met Massive Genius, who's like this Master P guy, a great producer. She knows another friend of hers, Richie, who has like an alternative rock band, which if you remember in the early 90s or the late 90s, early 2000s, that the two big things were really Master P, that gangster rap, sort of group, and then also the grunge music, the Blink 182s, the Green Days, all of that. So that is kind of what she wants to do, and she kind of has a rock band that she knows in sort of that era. Adriana talks about the lessons she learned, and like I said, I truly believe everyone should work in a restaurant at some point. I really believe that every entrepreneur should work in a restaurant at some point. So we cut now to the scene where Hesh and Massive are having a sit down about the music industry, and that he's talking about the retributions that he feels are owed to one of Hesh's former artists. That it sounds like this guy passed away and his mom's still alive, but that she's really owed the money because the kid wrote the songs and basically Hesh took the credit. Hesh is saying, "I wrote the songs and the kid performed them." Hesh is saying, Massive is saying, "No, you took money from this kid." Obviously, he's African American, Hesh is Jewish. There's this sort of contention there in everything that's going on with that. And that there should be retributions paid because these kids were taken advantage of. And I think it's something too, when you look at this and you talk about business deals and business arrangements, it's tough, right? I think it's tough for everyone in business. Now, this is obviously based on somewhat of a racial concept. That's what Master's kind of saying. You took advantage of, these young African-American boys, being a white producer. They didn't know any better. But I think in business anyway, right? And I see this a lot too. I see a lot of older, experienced people trying to help younger entrepreneurs and charge them a lot of money or get equity in their business or do these different things. Just because someone's older than you or more experienced or done different things doesn't mean that they're always going to guide you in the right direction or give you the right advice. Now, a lot of times there are things, and listen, I think inevitably there's more to be learned from the people that are older than you, right? Like if someone's been in the business, like if you're starting out in the industry, if you're starting out, and you want to open a restaurant and you're looking at an older guy who's been running a restaurant for 25, 30 years and is successful, of course you could learn something from him. But if you're looking at a guy who comes to you and says, yeah, I've been in the restaurant business, I've owned 6 or 7 different restaurants in all these different areas, now maybe none of them are open anymore, and he's giving you the runaround, or, oh yeah, I can help you, but you got to pay me, X amount of thousands of dollars and tens of thousands of dollars to do this. Just because someone's older than you doesn't mean they can always help you. You should look to get advice from people who are successful where you want to be successful, and that success is visual. Success does not hide. It does not hide. It's very visible. And you got to look, man. If there's someone who owns a restaurant, they got a chain of restaurants, and they got their own food lines that come out of it, and they're somewhere where you want to be, then you need to figure out, how do I get there, right? How do I get to that place where this person is? How do I get to the place where they're at? And that's something really important, I think, for you to look at. And as you're going through and as you're building your business, look for people that you could trust and look for how you can grow in that. I think that's an important lesson to learn here. Now we cut to a scene where Dr. Melfi and Dr. Cusamano, which, remember, Dr. Cusamano referred Dr. Melfi to Tony. They're having a dinner, and they're having basically company over. It looks like they're having this Italian meal, and this becomes the real Italians versus fake Italian, sort of thing comes on, and we're going to get to what that means. And they're kind of, really talking a little bit about Tony behind their back. So Dr. Melfi obviously is uncomfortable because she's treating Tony, and her and Dr. Cusamano do a good job of keeping this secret at the dinner table. But basically, they say, hey, well, what's it like having a gangster as a neighbor to Dr. Cusamano? And Jeannie says, the wife says, oh, well, there's a new car in the driveway every week, which we know isn't true because Tony's not like Christopher. Remember what I said? He's got the house, but he's not buying a new car every week. So we know that's not true. And they're kind of talking about, mobsters and movies, and they're basically like these fake tough guys, right? They're all like talking about how they are. And he says, oh, he gave me a great box of Monte Cristos. You want to smoke it? And they all start smoking them, and they're all acting like these tough guys because they're smoking, cigars here that they got from a mob guy. So they think they're just the cat's meow and the toughest things in the world. And this is making Melfi really uncomfortable. This is making Dr. Melfi very, very uncomfortable because she knows Tony, and they even kind of put him down. One of the ladies says, well, I was at the fundraiser at their house, and if you remember, Carmela put that fundraiser over to kind of impress everybody, and she goes, did you see that Goomba Murano glass they have? And Dr. Melfi's like, I like Murano glass. So it is important too. I mean, and when you see, once again, your network is your net worth. I know people say that all the time, but your network is your values and who you are. I mean, if you're hanging around people that are talking, shit about people behind their back and making fun of them because they think they're better than other people, I mean, that's a dangerous cycle, right? That's a dangerous place to be sometimes. I think it's important that we're aware of who we are and who we are associating with, and are these the people we want to be with? I think Dr. Melfi even sees like, hey, this is not, I know I'm treating Tony, and there's a gray line with that, and we'll dig into that in later episodes, but I think she's even uncomfortable with the conversation that's taking place and what's sort of going on here. So now we cut to Tony and Dr. Melfi are actually at Dr. Melfi's office, and now they're having a conversation about expanding Tony's network. And he's like, I don't know. And Tony, I mean, here's a typical thing. I mean, this is something you would think a kid would be saying. I'm worried what my friends would think if I start heading out with the Menegon. And, Dr. Melfi's like, what do you mean? He goes, well, Cusamano's, Wonder Bread Wop. He eats his Sunday sauce out of a jar, which we know as Italians is a sin. But, basically he's saying like, listen, my friends will make fun of me, but I know it's something I need to do to better who I am and better my family's life and make life better for everybody. So, I think it's really important to sort of see that idea of expanding the network, expanding who you are, and expanding what you do is important for growth. And Dr. Melfi says, hey, it just may be something you have to do. Like, why not do that? Why not give it a shot? So I think she's stating the importance of doing that, but Tony is obviously very uncomfortable with this. Dr. Melfi then, as Tony's leaving, says, oh, I was actually at a dinner party at the Cusamano's house last night. And he goes, oh, really? You should have came by. I live right next door. And as he's walking out, he kind of gives a smug look and says, you saw my house, and kind of like boastful, like, because he's like, yeah, see, I'm not a schlub. I got a nice house. Look at me. Like, I'm important too. So even though he pours her heart out to her and he tells all his problems, he's kind of, once again, flaunting the house as a status symbol. And if you remember, that's what Massive was doing with Christopher, and Christopher does with the car. So interesting in different ways in which people see status. I think it's fascinating throughout the episode here. So next scene we cut to is Tony and Carmela actually do expand their network. They go to the barbecue. Dr. Cusamano's there. Tony's around the grill with all these guys grilling this, one guy's a stockbroker, one guy's a doctor. They're kind of talking about these different things. I think one guy's a lawyer. And if you remember the scene, that one of the very first scenes of the very first episode, I think this runs in a very interesting parallel, if you will, to that first episode where the guys were sitting around Tony's guys and they were barbecuing. Remember, Tony had the panic attack at the barbecue for AJ's birthday. And then in the other episode, he's consoling Ari and letting him cook, and all the guys are hanging there around the barbecue. It's a really interesting thing. And Tony's uncomfortable. The guys are all talking about different stuff. They're going back and forth. They bring up a stock thing about doing some insider trading, which is actually illegal. So here's Tony when he's around his gangster friends. They don't really talk about anything illegal. They just talk about, kind of life and what's going on. Here's these guys that are supposed to be quote unquote good citizens, doctors, lawyers, all, stockbrokers, all good people. And they're basically having a conversation about breaking the law, inside trading. And when Tony asks about it and how he can get involved, they get uncomfortable because they think he's the criminal, he's the mobster. I mean, these are all the same guys that were making fun of him at dinner the night before about being a mobster and a gangster, and just because they murder and steal and do other things, these guys are doing the exact same thing, but just in a different way. So I think it's an interesting parallel. And then you cut to Carmela too with all the wives. So all the wives are sitting at the table, and Carmela's listening to them talk about how they play the stock market as well. And they're like, we just don't play, we win. And Carmela wants that. She wants to be that savvy business partner. She's spent, and you can see Meadows in high school. AJ's getting older. She's been dependent on Tony financially, I think, in the earlier part of their marriage. She's ready to sort of be on her own. She's ready to sort of blaze her own financial path, which is important. And I think in any relationship, it's important to figure out, hey, how do I blaze my own financial status as well to keep things kind of stable? So very interesting on some of the idea of growth and expanding the network. But once again, if you expand your network, I think one of the things we see, Tony and Carmela are expanding their network. They're hearing about things and they're around people that they aren't normally around. And you saw, like I said, when Tony had a barbecue at his house, they were super comfortable. Now that they're around this group, they're very uncomfortable. So expanding your network can make you very uncomfortable. So I think that's important to remember. The other thing is that these people aren't comfortable having Tony and Carmela around. I think they thought it would be cool to invite a gangster and his wife to their barbecue. And you can see a couple situations where it made them uncomfortable as well. So I think expanding our network on both sides is going to make you feel both, knowledgeable, and you'll gain new information, but it could also make you very uncomfortable as well. And sometimes, hey, you have to get uncomfortable to grow. So I hate the saying, sometimes you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think that's the stupidest saying I've ever heard. But sometimes you do have to get uncomfortable to grow. And I heard someone say today, I think it was, you could either slowly experience the pain, and it could eat away with you, or you can experience it fast all at once and get through it quick, but then that's how you actually grow. So very interesting concept there. We see Hesh too. In the next scene now, we cut to a scene with Hesh, and he's listening to the music that Massive wants him to play the Retribution on. And you can see he's having a cocktail. He's debating, what do I do? He's debating, what is the right thing to do? What should I be doing in this particular situation? And it's really, I think, a unique moment for Hesh, because you could see he's saying, hey, were my past actions right? He's looking at pictures on the wall. He's like, wait a second. He's almost justifying his actions. Now, I'm not here to debate whether what he did was right or wrong. We don't know the parameters and the details of it. And once again, too, I think anyone outside of a situation looking at it, I think sometimes, too, we see this in business a lot. You may think you're doing something right, but you were actually doing something wrong, right? And it's tough. I mean, overpaying, underpaying employees. How do we manage things? How do we do things in business? It's never easy. It's never an easy direction to say, hey, these are the right decisions. I mean, we see this all the time. People leave companies and owners think they treated the employee great. But then when the employee leaves, they start bad-mouthing the company. Well, they didn't pay me enough, and they made me do this, and they made me do that. But the owner's like, man, do you know, and you never know, right? Like sometimes a business owner may have given you $1,000 Christmas bonus, and that may have mean them foregoing a vacation, or may have meant them foregoing buying some extra gifts for their kids. And why it may not have seemed a lot to you, it may have been a lot to them. So I think it's always something to keep in mind. There's two sides to every story, but there also, listen, there has to be that balance. We have to find that balance in what we do. So, all right, next we cut to another musical situation here. Adriana's in the recording studio. So she's got this band locked down. Christopher bought recording studio time, and they're laying down a track that she's going to try to get Massive to buy, and she thinks she's going to be massively successful. So here Adriana has a band. She thinks it's great. She's got funding from Christopher for the studio. She's got massive genius, so she'll be able to distribute this song. Everything is lined up for success, right? Everything is lined up for success here. Everything's lined up to be successful. But we can see the guy that is producing the song, working the soundboard in the recording booth, basically is like, he's smoking a cigarette. He's at his wit's end. He's like, these guys suck. These guys are absolutely terrible. They are not good at what they're doing. And he's basically saying, hey, you know what? It's as good as it's going to get. I think everyone's trying their best. And Christopher's like, Adrian, like, what? It's not good. And the guys in the band are a little bit cocky, and they're like, yeah, we should have bagged it 2 days ago when this thing was right. running a business is a lot like this, right? Here you have ownership, which is Adriana. She really believes in what they're doing. The guys that are working are a little overly cocky and think they're great at what they're doing. The producer, who I like to call him the COO, really realizes what's going on and says isn't right. And then you got Christopher, the money guy that's financing all of this. It doesn't understand why we've got all these great components. Why is it not working out? You really need to balance in business things and manage the people and the processes correctly to be successful. Just because everything looks like it's set up for success doesn't mean it's going to be there. Adriana had, the passion, the desire, and the knowledge of the music industry. You had this great band there. You had Christopher. You had the studio. You had massive genius for distribution. But everybody wasn't putting the right effort in, and everybody wasn't being honest what they needed to do to be successful. The workers or the band guys thought they were great. They were the best. Christopher thought he was funding this, everything. If I'm paying for this and we got massive, then Adriana knows music, everything should work. But when things look perfect, it doesn't always mean it's going to work out. And that's what you got to remember. And that's what you got to be careful of as you're going through and you're doing that. So, all right. And then, so we see, cut to the next scene, Carmela and Meadow. Carmela walks into the kitchen and she sees Carmela there talking to a stockbroker on the phone. This is before you buy stocks online, and telling him what stocks to buy. Meadow's like, you're buying stocks? What is that? She says, Meadow, women are better savers than men, which, interesting concept. Okay. But here, Carmela knows she's doing something secretive. And I think she's right. She needs to save. She knows that Tony's been doing, things and she doesn't know where the money is. Her and Tony were discussing this in a previous scene. And I think the idea of this is that, she really knows that she doesn't want Meadow to tell Tony. So what does she do? She bribes her. And Tony's kind of done the same thing with Meadow a few times. I'll take you out. Let's go to the spa. Let's do this. Is that right? Is that wrong? I don't know, but we'll kind of see what happens and we'll go from there. All right, so we cut to the next scene. Tony is golfing with Dr. Cusamano and his friends, and they treat him kind of different and not in a good way. They're asking him a lot of questions about the mafia. Now, remember when they were at the barbecue and Tony asked him about the stock trading, these guys clammed up. Oh, no, nothing. No big deal. We don't want to say anything. But they were asking him really inappropriate questions. Did you have to prick your finger? Did you have to do this? Did you, they're asking him all the cheesy, Godfather things that they saw because they think they're on the golf court. And you could tell Tony's getting pissed. He's getting upset, and it's an uncomfortable situation. And remember what I said, when you expand your network, it's going to make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. And they go, they're walking through the golf course, and Cusamano knows too. I think Dr. Cusamano is probably, out of everybody, knows, hey, this is inappropriate. My friends are acting kind of ridiculous. And that's why also, too, you got to be careful who you let into your network and who you connect them with. A lot of times in business, someone may say, hey, can you introduce me to this person? Or can you introduce me to that person? Well, that, it's only as good as the person that you trust and how they're going to interact. Here, Tony brought, you would think that in this situation, Cusamano was probably more worried about Tony embarrassing him. Cusamano was probably more worried about Tony being a gangster and doing something wrong. But it turns out the embarrassing guys were Cusamano's friends, the lawyer and the investment banker, right? And the other doctor guy. It wasn't Tony. Tony was probably the most well-behaved and the most polite out of everybody, where these guys were the embarrassing ones. So you never know how a situation's going to go. Tony, too, and to his credit, the other thing is, too, and when we're in these uncomfortable situations, and I've heard this before, somebody would say, oh, you're an entrepreneur, that's crazy, and listen, sometimes you're in those situations. Sometimes you're in situations where you're like, oh, you're an entrepreneur, that's great, but tell me what it's like. Is it like this? Is it like that? But Tony, realizes too that he's a little bit being made fun of, and he gets it, and he knows he's kind of being poked at. And he talks about this with Dr. Melfi a little bit later on, but they ask him if he knew John Gotti, so he's like, all right, I'm going to fuck with these guys a little bit. And he tells them the story about a bungalow, about a bungalow truck, and they're just all in. And I think this is a credit to Tony, though, about, the time John Gotti outbid him on a bungalow bar truck, and he tells his story, and the guys are just drawn in. Tony is able to take control of the room, though. And as an entrepreneur, if things aren't going your way, or people are making fun of you, or maybe they're pushing back on your business, or whatever it may be, if you could learn how to give a speech or talk to people or direct communication, this is what Tony is great at. We see this throughout the episode. This is also what makes him a great, episode. Even though these guys maybe didn't respect him and they were almost making fun of him, he was able to flip the script on them and captivate them. I mean, what a powerful lesson there. What a powerful moment for Tony. What a powerful moment in this scene for him to sort of take that on, and then they move on and we left. We see, too, Chris, now that he did the sit down with Hesh, he's bringing him the song from the recording studio and asking him if it's good. And Hesh is listening to the song, and he's listening to it, and even though Chris knows that this isn't Hesh's sort of genre, he asks him, and Hesh says it's not good. It's like, what do you mean it's not good? It's just not your type of music. What do you know? Blah, blah, blah. He's like, listen, kid. He goes, I don't care what type of music it is. A hit is a hit. He goes, when I first heard Hendrix before he got big, he goes, I knew it. He says, kids, I don't know what it is, but you have it. You can tell when people have passion, talent, and things really are in the right place and they're going to be successful. I think, and Hesh is one of these guys that's able to spot that. I think that's what made Hesh successful, right? He's able to spot talent. He's able to spot greatness. And Chris is not. We know Chris is not through everything that he does, but he's trying that. And I think sometimes, too, you have to listen to the advice of what people say. And Chris does take it in. But, it goes back to that it factor, right? And I think a lot of times, too, we have to double down on what our talents are. And Chris is searching for what his talent is. So is Adriana. I think that's why they make a good couple. They're both sort of searching for what their talents are. But the idea of the it factor is if you could find that and hone in on what you do is great. When people say that, says, man, I don't know what it is, but you have it when it comes to that one thing. That's really what you should be doubling down on. We see, too, cut back now to Tony and Dr. Melfi in the office. And Tony's talking about the golf outing. And he's basically telling Dr. Melfi about this kid that lived in their neighborhood that had a little bit of a cleft lip. He talked funny. So he's like, he says, he says, that's how he used to talk. And he says, listen, we always used to kind of make fun of this kid. And he said he didn't understand, they would always do that when they wanted Jimmy Smash. And he says, we'd invite him out. He'd sing. We'd make him sing songs because he talked funny and we'd laugh our ass off. And he says, I found out later on, he goes, and I felt like shit that he used to go home and cry. He used to go home and cry. Because we make fun of him. And he goes, I kind of felt bad because of that. He goes, but I never really related to how Jimmy Smash felt until I played golf with these guys, until he played golf with Dr. Cusamano and his buddies. And Dr. Melfi knows exactly what he's talking about because she experienced it at the dinner party. She goes, I get it. And she really doesn't say anything, but she acknowledges it and she knows how he feels. And I think it was a great lesson for Tony. We see now Hesh, remember he was debating. Hesh calls Massive and basically tells him he's not going to give him the retribution. They kind of argue back and forth. And so I think if you watch the show, you're like, wow, is this going to be a gang fight? Are we going to see two gangs go at it here? The new, school gangsters, the gangster rappers go against the Italian gangsters. Is there going to be a war? Like, is this going to be the battle? You almost thought this was going to be the climactic part of The Sopranos where you see two different gangs go at it. But no, it basically gets squashed. And Massive says he's going to sue. Hesh says that Massive sampled a sound on one of his records, so he's going to counter sue. Massive even says, man, and Tony says to Massive, man, you're going to sue? And he says, would I pay retainers? Fuck yeah. And Tony's like, I hear that. So they almost respect Massive for like, okay, now we know, who this guy is. And they kind of put him in the place. So we see all these different characters. Dr. Cusamano, Massive Genius, Tony, everybody, even though, Chris, even though they're trying to get out of their comfort zone and expand their networks, it didn't work out the way they expected. But they're all adapting in different ways. And there's an argument. I would say Hesh and Massive are probably two of the most successful out of this. Because they learned how to handle the situation. I think Tony and Chris actually struggled with it a little bit, in my opinion, as we go on. Chris lets Adriana, too, know that the music thing isn't good, and it's probably going to work out. And I think it's just that lesson. Success doesn't always come, even if you think you have all parts, right? Even if you think you have everything in place, it doesn't mean that there's going to be success. And I think it's a tough lesson for Adriana to learn, but a lesson she needed to learn nonetheless. And I think it's hard on her. I really do. And you feel for her in this, but I think kudos to Chris, because even though I said Chris and Tony didn't grow, I think the one thing Chris did learn in this is that, hey, Hesh is right. These guys aren't good. Massive is just kind of maybe jerking us around to get, the deal out of Hesh, and it's time to move on. And I think that's really mature of Chris, really mature in what he did and going from there. Tony, once again, knowing that Dr. Cusamano and his friends kind of embarrassed him, he decides, hey, I'm going to fuck with him again. And he gets kind of a shoebox and puts sand in it and ties it. Carmela comes in, she laughs, she thinks it's cute, and he goes over to Cusamano's house and gives him the box and says, hey, can you hold this? Remember, we started the show with Tony giving Cusamano a box of cigars, which he was really excited about. Now we end the show with Tony giving Cusamano a box, wrapped, and it's kind of like, hey, you did a favor for me now. I gave you cigars. Now can you hold this box and do me a solid? There's nothing in it, but Cusamano's scared. He doesn't know if there's a dead body in there. He doesn't know if it's a gun. He doesn't know what it is. They're obviously scared they could get in trouble. So where he thought it was cool to kind of tout his relationship with Tony early on at the dinner party and at the golf course, now that he has to do something that could be illegal, he's all scared and upset. So really just a great episode. So many entrepreneurial lessons in here. Like I said, the idea of expanding your network, the idea of who do you trust, the idea of recognizing talent and seeing where it is, the ideas of that just because you have a perfect situation set up in business doesn't always mean it's going to be successful. You have to do the work. So shout out to everybody. I didn't do my shout outs at the beginning. Make sure you guys are following us on the Sopranopreneur Instagram, Omerta Cigars. Check them out. Mafia Chronicles, Hardcore Italians. If you like the show notes, they are below. For more about me, MikeFigueroa.com. For more Sopranopreneurs, visit Sopranopreneur.com. And I will see you on the next episode.